You're listening to Art Affairs, episode 71. Today I'll be talking to Nicomi Nix Turner. Alright, so my name is Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. Art Affairs is my attempt at shining a spotlight on the many wonderful people that make up this amazing art community, featuring conversations with artists, gallerists, curators, telling their stories. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairs.podcast.com, but the best way to stay plugged in is to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're really enjoying the show and want to help support what I'm doing here in an even bigger way, check out the Art Affairs Patreon. Not only does it give you an opportunity to help keep the show going, but there are several community-oriented benefits as well, like getting early access to episodes and suggesting questions for upcoming guests. You can find all the information about that at patreon.com/artaffairs. You can also connect with the show on Instagram at Art Affairs Podcast. All right, so today's guest is artist Nicomi Nix Turner. Nicomi creates gorgeous grayscale graphite pieces, rich with symbology and emotion. But she actually started her career working as a commercial illustrator and creative director. We talk about how she transitioned from working in the commercial space to being a successful gallery artist, her focus on nature and its importance in her life, the last few years of creative exploration and experimentation she's been doing, and a whole lot more. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Nicomi Nix Turner. Nicomi, it's so good to have you on the show. I'm so excited because I've been talking to you about this for a long time, and we finally, I think you were one of the first people that I talked to before I even started this show about potentially coming on in the future, so I'm so stoked that we could finally make this happen. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I remember we were sitting in Minneapolis and you were telling me about all the equipment you were getting and I don't know, should I do it? And yeah, it's pretty awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and just your words of support and Aaron's and everybody there, it certainly gave me confidence to actually do it. So thank you. But before we jump into you, I'm sure everybody's wondering, how's Luna doing?
Oh, she is doing great. I don't know. She's now almost 14, and I think she's starting to get, I don't know, a little loopy in her elder age. So that's been fun. I don't know. She walks around talking to herself. Yeah, it's interesting.
But vision and all that stuff is still good?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I spoil her. So I think she's going to live for an eon. So that's wonderful.
Awesome. Very cool. And so, as far as your background goes, I know you were born in Oakland and you obviously lived there for a long time, but you grew up in southern Oregon. So tell me about that. How did you end up spending so much time in your childhood in Oregon?
Yeah, so I'm I think fourth generation Oaklander. So all of my family is here. But my mom really wanted to, I think, have a completely different life. And so I grew up on a cattle ranch in Southern Oregon until she was diagnosed with cancer. And my whole family was down in Southern California or Northern California. So, I moved back down here. And I have not left.
And so spending that much time on a ranch and in a more rural area, does that mean that you were spending a lot of time in nature and, just adventures and childhood adventures out with snakes and critters and all that stuff?
Oh, yeah. I really didn't have many friends, just based on where I was located. It's like the suburbs. You have your best friend across the street or, you see kids from school after school and get to play with them and stuff like that. I definitely didn't have that. And if I did want a play date, I'd have to get shuttled to wherever someone else lives, or if their parents were gracious enough, they would drive to our house, which was pretty far away. So I spent a lot of time by myself, played with my dog. Did a lot of ranch chores. I played in the ditches. I was just a wild child.
Didn't you raise rabbits too? Like have a
Oh my God, yeah. We raised rabbits. We had Black Angus cattle. I'm just surprised like we didn't have like the full on like ranch farm with like pigs and chickens. We just had a really odd mixture of cows and rabbits. Um, and a lot of people raise rabbits to eat, but my mom, I think she collected strays. I'm sure that the rabbits started out from her like being told by someone like, "Oh, this rabbit's gonna die. Like, would you like it?" That's what happened with us and cats. Like, we had 7 house cats.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, we raised rabbits that I'm sure the intention was either for show or for meat, but we just kept having rabbits and, that saying like breed like rabbits, like, yeah, there's a lot of babies. Learned a lot of weird things when I was a kid, thanks to just, I guess, the situation of my environment. But yeah.
And so with your more rural upbringing, is that why you're so good at urban gardening today? I mean, you seem to be really great at that.
I think so. I think I usually kill houseplants, but for some reason I'm able to grow like vegetables and things. Yeah, it's neat because it's kind of a nod to what I experienced as a child in kind of a city setting. But yeah, I don't know. All of my vegetables I grow I don't know. I grow them, but they're weird. And it's like my carrots are very strange looking. Like nothing would win a ribbon.
I mean, it's all in the effort though, right? So did you have any artists in your family though? I mean, when you were growing up, did you have that sort of presence around you?
There were creative people. I don't think anyone was, compelled to ever call themselves an artist. My mom, she was a nurse for a long time and then taught anatomy and physiology, but did a lot of creative things like sewing. I feel like cooking is really creative, but that could be argued against, I guess. And then my uncle's a woodworker. So lots of people doing things with their hands.
And I remember reading that your grandfather was really influential in that he had a very extensive art collection and historical artifacts, and was really kind of your main exposure to that sort of experience growing up. So is that what kind of exposed you to that side of art?
Yeah, I would say that he was probably one of my biggest influences in terms of kind of exposure to illustration and artwork and historical pieces. He collected Japanese artifacts and woodblock illustration prints with my Nana. They both avidly did that. But I think what had the biggest impact on me was their collection of Fillmore posters, like an extensive collection that I would pore over when I would go and visit them from an early age. So I think that has always just had a big impact in, I guess, creativity for me, or more so the fascination of what people can do. Like as a kid, like looking at Stanley Mouse illustrations or, things like that was pretty wild. And, that would be the first thing when I would go to their house. I would like pull the giant binders out and just flip through them. Like it was my favorite thing to do. So, they both had just a very large impact on me creatively and I think just as a person as well.
And was that part of what, I guess, inspired you to express your own, creative side or, create art yourself?
I think that was more a remedy for loneliness as a kid. I used to draw all the time if I wasn't outside. And I think unprompted too. Like, I think it was just something I really enjoyed doing. I wasn't really much for toys or things like that. I still have a couple of the drawings that I did when I was a really young child. It's pretty funny. I don't know. Some of them had like my people had bare hands
Oh.
and sharp teeth, and they all had cats. Yeah, it's very, very weird.
Very cool. I mean, so, that experience creating art was more something that you did for fun, though, right? Like you weren't thinking of it as a potential career path, because if I remember correctly, you were aiming to be a marine biologist originally and going into more of a science route. But it was your art teacher in high school that kind of, corrected your course, I guess, so to speak. So tell me about that. Like what, and thank you to Nicomi's high school art teacher. But I mean, what was it that changed your trajectory or motivated that?
I think the biggest thing that motivated that was when my mom died. It was a very dark time for me. I felt pretty thrown off the rails as it was. And so like psychologically, I don't think I would have made much of a marine biologist or how those studies would have gone. I was definitely fascinated with the idea of doing something in the realm of sciences or medicine, just because that was something that was close to home with my mom. And it was very inspiring and fascinating, kind of poring over the books that she used for her classes and, reading about the body and, all of that was really interesting to me. But when she died, I finished off my last year of high school in California. And yeah, it was a thing. I hated it. I was like, this, where am I? Yeah. So I don't think I really had much ambition at that point. I was just trying to survive as a teenager. And I actually think I was probably set to not graduate because I kept skipping PE and I would just be in the art room. And yeah, the art teacher suggested that I apply to art schools. And I was like, that sounds like a tragic waste of time. Like, what am I going to learn there? Like, what do they teach there? Like, I really didn't have any sense of like an advisor or, things like that besides my art teacher. And so, yeah, I applied to California College of the Arts and somehow got in. I made a portfolio and everything. And I just remember that like one summer just trying to figure out how to do that. But I guess whatever I made, impressed the admission people. And so, yeah, I was enrolled in CCA and yeah, that was really interesting. I did not finish art school.
And you were there for like a year, right? Before you left?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had moved to this apartment that was very, very close to the campus. I didn't really want to have to share a room with anyone. The idea of like being in a room with strangers was freaky to me at the time. It still is. Maybe that would have been an interesting experience. But yeah, so I got an apartment that was close to the campus, and my neighbor was friends with someone who owned a company and was like, oh, you draw? Like, you should, go talk to them. And so I ended up getting a job as an illustrator and a designer for the brand Emily the Strange. And I quit art school because it was very expensive. And I think a lot of people get a lot out of art school, but then I also think there's a lot of people who maybe don't. And I felt, at least at the time, and it might have been just because my head wasn't really in the game. I think I was still not functioning on a high level. Still felt pretty lost in order to actually like absorb and benefit from art school and those surroundings. It was very inspiring. I thought that well, it was fascinating being around so many creative people. And I would, go home from class and I would just, go back to my apartment and I would just paint or draw all day. And so that was wonderful. I think I started to realize that art wasn't just something that I could do, but it was something that made me happy.
Mm.
So yeah, I left art school because I somehow was able to get some hands-on work, as it would be. And I actually was able to stay with Emily for, 6 years. That was a wild, fun time.
And so in retrospect, I guess, are there aspects of, an art education that you feel like you missed out on because you did leave early that you kind of regret missing?
I think what I regret most is probably the art history side of it. And I always find myself, trying to learn those things on my own, just because that is probably the most fascinating aspect of like how we got here and what's been done over the years and why. And so I think that and writing papers, I know that has nothing to do with like physically doing art, but I feel like that would have been what I would have been probably really passionate about had I finished that.
It was funny, writing papers is usually people's least favorite thing about school. At least it was mine.
I know. I'm just such a nerd. Like that just sounds thrilling to me. Yeah. I don't know. That feels like something that would have been fascinating. I think also, and having the ability to have a little bit more back and forth with peers.
Yeah, so the community aspect of school, I guess.
Yeah, I had a studio that was in a little bit of it wasn't communal per se, but the spaces, we had a giant common area, and being able to interface with other artists and just talk shop, as it were, was wonderful. I think that was the most beneficial part of being in that space was, being able to talk about artists and process, and even kind of having input into your work, having like micro critiques. Yeah.
And so you mentioned, shifting into professional work with Emily the Strange, and you were there for, 6 years and went from, entry-level illustrator to creative director in that time, which is like an impressive trajectory. What kind of stuff were you working on and responsible for as creative director?
Yeah, so the apparel line was probably our bread and butter, and the component that I worked on the most. And so it was, designing illustrations for all of our T-shirts and accessories and product for, I think it was like 4 seasons times 6 years. It's a lot of work working on like the brand style guide. We had like a really small team. I don't know. We were really DIY about everything. And so at one point I was doing I think I did like a comic book spread, which was really fun for our Dark Horse comic. We did art shows. We did really weird things like go to Disneyland and have like pop-up events for Bats Day at the park. Yeah, it was awesome. So I was basically drawing Emily from ever I would roll out of bed until sometimes like 10 o'clock at night, wow. 3 o'clock in the morning. I slept at my desk sometimes just to get our seasons out. And yeah, it was a wild time. I think part of that probably gave me some unhealthy behaviors in terms of just not really taking care of myself to get things done. Yeah, but it was wonderful.
Did you have time while you were working on the brand to also do your own personal artwork on the side? I mean, it sounds like you were working so much on their stuff. Did you have time for your stuff too?
Yeah, I just wasn't taking care of myself.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I had like this, I'd get coffee on my way to work, but then I had like a sandwich bag full of instant coffee that I would just put in water throughout the day. And I'd finish a jar of instant coffee
Wow.
probably every week, along with all the other coffee I was drinking. I wasn't sleeping very much. So I'd go home and work on my own stuff until basically I just fall asleep on like my floor. Like I didn't even have a bed in my apartment because there was no point. I wasn't sleeping. I had my draft table in my bedroom. I had like a little like futon couch that I would wake up on.
I mean, were there things about that experience that helped you learn, or that you could apply to your own kind of creative goals?
Yeah, definitely. I think just not stopping was the biggest thing that I applied. The dedication to, when you're designing for a character, you have to really make sure that it looks like the character. You have to draw the eyes right. You have to draw the hands right. Like everything you do, you're training the eye and training your hand to do something very specific. And I think I took that kind of rigidity and applied that to my own work. I put a lot of pressure on myself creatively. And I think that's where that started. I think knuckling under and just creating nonstop was probably not the healthiest thing, but I feel it was an exercise in like how much can I produce? How much can I learn? How much can I grow? The things I was doing was for myself. I wasn't showing them to anyone at the time. And so, that amount of rigidity just for myself, I don't know. I explored a lot of things. I explored a lot of styles, which was, in stark contrast to the work that I was doing on a daily basis at Emily. So, yeah.
And so why did you end up stopping, working for them? What led to you leaving?
I think it was just my time. Like I had been there for so long and I had, kind of wanted to just do more of my own work and focus on growing my own voice and kind of not being split between commercial work and the work that I was creating for myself.
And what's your opinion in general on commercial work and, just that collaborative experience of working on somebody else's brand? What do you think about that just as a career practice?
I think, there's a lot of enjoyable aspects to it. I think that for me personally, having done it for so long, I wouldn't do it again. Just because it takes a lot out of you that maybe you could put to personal things. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's a lot of fun to be able to explore a world that's already kind of been developed and see what you can apply to that world and how you can affect that world.
And so was your goal at that point, as you were, kind of leaving the commercial work behind, was your goal then to ultimately do gallery work full time?
No, I didn't really have a goal. I think, towards the end of me working there, I think Juxtapose they had found, I don't even know how they found my art because Instagram wasn't a thing back then. I think maybe they had done a write-up on a show that I had done. We had like a gallery in the bottom of our offices at Emily, and I had done kind of like a mini show there. We'd rotated out for people who worked there. The owner, Rob Rieger, had a great show down there. we also use it as like a showroom space, but I think they might have encountered my work that way. But, it was really neat to, have them recognize my work back then. And I think it all just kind of happened naturally because I think at that point, Modern Eden had reached out, and I did a show with them in, I think, 2008, which was my first like actual gallery solo show.
The gallery that you had below you guys in Emily Strange, was that Gallery Extraña?
Yeah, that was our gallery downstairs. And yeah, I did. That was the first time I had shown work like that in public. Like we did a lot of Emily shows, and we had like group shows for people or artists who were wanting to draw Emily the Strange or associated with the brand, or, we had great Bay Area, like, punk artists. We had Winston Smith, who, made some really awesome pieces for these shows, but we'd have them at 111 Minute, and I'd put like a piece in there, and, it was really fun, but that wasn't something I was like, oh, I'm going to do this full time. And so the show at Emily was really awesome, but it still felt like it was, just me enjoying art with the people that I enjoyed art with all the time. Like it wasn't something to me that felt like, look what I did. I just kind of felt like a party.
right. Just a coworker, like get together.
Yeah, it was really fun though. I'll never forget that.
Had you been very active in the art community or the gallery community there in the Bay Area at that point?
I was to an extent. I more so, I think, was just trying to understand what that even was. I was still really young. Like I started working at Emily when I was 19. And so I was still a dumb kid. And so, yeah, I mean, the internet was there, but there wasn't really the kind of like online presence of artist communities. We had this website called Fecal Face that I used to love. John Tripp and a whole bunch of other people started that, and, really made this kind of like online community that was really inspiring and wonderful to just get to see all these people who were in this area and what they created. And so, I would, look at shows and galleries that were around based on what I was seeing on Fecal Face. And, so I hadn't really asked to be in any shows. Like I don't know. I still have a problem with this where I feel awkward asking, hey, can I be in a show? I didn't really know the right approach to do that. I did show in a really neat group show at this place called Soma Arts in San Francisco. And you got paired up with another artist and created something together. And it was a really, really interesting group show. And I think that was kind of one of the intros of like, oh, like I could actually do this and, enjoy being able to be a part of something. I just didn't really, I wasn't trying to push anything to happen. So I'm not really, I don't know, maybe it was organic.
And so Modern Eden reached out to you for that nocturnal show, that original show with them?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, since then, is having a strong relationship with a gallery something that you feel is an important component to your career and artist career in general, especially with like the rise of social media and stuff like that?
Boy. I do. I think we would all be missing something in life if we didn't have a space where we could experience art as an individual, and be able to look at it in person. I think we see so much art on our phones with social media that we take it for granted. So I think they're invaluable in that sense. I think that a lot of things are shifting in the art world in terms of, I think, how shows are put together, or, the types of artists. And so it's kind of an interesting space to work in and be a part of. But I do think it's important for myself. We all lost a lot of things over the past few years. For myself, it's like Last Rites closed, and that was a gallery that I really enjoyed showing with, and a lot of things have kind of shifted that I still feel it's really important. But I think for myself personally, I'm trying to figure out how my work evolves now, where it kind of, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to be in 50 group shows this year, So I think my relationship with showing in galleries has changed a little bit. Yeah, but I still think it's important.
Is that still something you're trying to kind of wrap your head around as far as what that looks like?
I guess so. I don't really put too much thought into it. There's a lot of galleries that I would love to show in. But I think for me, the work is a lot more important than kind of like, where am I going to share this, or am I going to share this?
I guess, what place does social media have?
I think social media for me almost doesn't feel like it belongs in my creative practice anymore. I don't really find it conducive to my explorations or where my art is presently. Like, I feel that I overshared a lot, in terms of like sharing process and in progress. And I think, a lot of artists love to do that and share that with their community. But I think sometimes in the process, you're sharing things that maybe should be kept to yourself, or maybe could help you evolve one step further. But because you've shared it, it's kind of like, oh, well, this is set in stone. I have to now keep doing this forever. So I think for me, it doesn't really serve as big of a purpose as it used to before. I love sharing my work, and sharing that with the, I think, little community that I have gotten to build, or who came along for the ride, so to speak. But I think for me, it's kind of gotten in the way of perhaps exploring things a little bit further that I'd like to, and that kind of goes with group shows as well. Like, I was just really grateful to be included in a lot of things, so I would always say yes. But I think now I'm kind of learning, like, I don't have to say yes to everything, even though I'd really love to. But like, the more I say yes to, the less time I have to, tackle the sketchbook that I have full of thumbnails that I should probably work on eventually. Yeah, so I don't know. Social media is a really weird thing. And I talk to a lot of friends who wish that they didn't have to be on it anymore. I think it has exhausted a lot of creatives, because at some point in time, I don't know where this evolution happened with the app, but everyone became content creators, whether they wanted to or not. I think neurologically, I think we're all the same, whether you want to admit it or not. The dopamine hits of a like is a double-edged sword. And, a lot of friends have said that they want off the train, but, it's part of the business and a part of kind of that aspect of it, which I don't know. I want to reject that fear and that way of looking at it for myself. Like, I don't want to be tethered to it as I have to do this. I have to share with you.
Well, you mentioned it also again can counteract some of your exploration or some of your creativity. Is that because the platform kind of encourages this expectation, or the people that are following you have this expectation of, I'm going to do the same thing and this is the box that I fit in?
I think for me, it's more so that I would rather explore really weird things on my own without there being the assumption that this is now what I'm doing. I think once people see something on your social media, they're like, oh, okay, that's what you're doing now. Like this is the content I was promised. I don't know. Maybe that's just my warped, jaded perception of it now. But for me, it doesn't seem like, oh wow, I just thought of this idea. Let me share it with 60,000 people plus, even before I've figured out what this idea really means to me or how I could evolve this.
Well, that makes sense. And so, there's definitely uncountable amounts of bad things in social media, but there's a couple of redeeming aspects, which is you have a close connection to people that you may not have the opportunity to. So how do you get that part of it in another way if you kind of pull back from social media? Have you thought about how you still kind of make that connection with people?
Yeah, I have a newsletter that occasionally I blow the dust off of. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have the answer to that. And I think that's something that I don't want to lose, because that does matter to me in terms of, the people who are interested in seeing what I'm working on or being a part of that creative outlet that exists in a digital space. I don't know. I don't have the answers, Michael.
Okay, sorry. So before we move off the social media topic, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the origin of your name on social media, Fernbeds. I have a theory, but I wanted to see just my own personal validation if it's correct or not, if you want to talk about it.
Oh, I've had people come up to me and they're like, they want to say hi, but then they don't know what to call me. And yeah, I think I had one person think that my name was Fernbeds, which I loved. I thought that was great. I don't know. I'm a product of old time internet where you didn't use your name. And I never looked at Instagram in the beginning as something that was I was going to have any popularity whatsoever, so I should use my name. Never thought about that. I really like the idea of fern beds. It's just a beautiful word. I used to live by a creek that was just engulfed in ferns, and I think that's how that came to be. It's my cellar door.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in an interview that I read that one of your first kind of discoveries of the beauty of nature was discovering a coyote, like a dead coyote on a bed of ferns. So I was like, oh, maybe that's part of the origin of the name is this kind of, cycle of life and death, and how this dying coyote is nourishing the ferns,
Yeah, ferns have always played a part in my life. They seem to follow me wherever I go.
That's a good segue into some of the, I want to talk to you a little bit about the themes that your work involves. And nature is a core component to your work and has been for a while. Whether it be returning to nature or the sanctity of nature or nature reclaiming certain aspects of life. So I guess, has nature always been a core focus for you and how you kind of tell your story in relation to the world?
Yeah, I mean, nature has always been something I've been closer to than people. I feel like I can understand it a little better. I think that, especially now in our modern age, we sometimes take it for granted. And we take for granted its power. And I love the duality of, kind of our city environment with, the nature that's around us, and being able to kind of get lost in plants and animals and, creating kind of worlds for myself that are different than what I live in. I think I've been doing that for quite some time now. Creating lush environments or, really focusing on animals as kind of stand-ins for a human component. A lot of the times a dog's not really a dog in my work. So yeah, nature has been definitely something that's invaluable to the story I'm trying to tell with my work.
Has it been hard to, how do you continue to stay connected with the nature, being in such an urban environment like Oakland? Like, how do you make that intentional, get yourself, immersed back into nature from time to time?
Oh, California is wonderful in the sense that you can drive like a few hours and be in snow, or you can drive, an hour and a half and be on the coastline. So it's not hard at all. We basically, there's this saying, under the watchful eye of Mount Tam. So we have like this gorgeous mountain that I love to go to. It's not hard at all. I think that's kind of the magic of it, is even if you're surrounded by pavement, you can find a trove of nature.
With nature being so important to you, I guess, how do you feel about the state and direction of the world? Are you hopeful? Like, where do you sit in that, this whole scheme of things with everything, and the way that it is with the environment?
I'm sorry, do you have 3 hours to talk?
That's a can of worms, I know.
Holy crap. I'm hopeful. I think that's the one thing that sometimes we forget about is, I think as much as we try to destroy it, nature is always going to find a way to fight back against our idiotic behavior. I'm not worried.
Okay. Yeah. I guess in the whole grand scheme of things, nature's going to always be here. It's whether we can survive in whatever it becomes.
Yeah. Maybe if you flip the question, like, how do I think about like our survival?
Like humanity, right?
Yeah. Nature's going to be fine.
Fair enough. Another aspect or another kind of thematic in your work that I really love is the kind of the depth of the symbology and a lot of which, the average observer may not even fully understand or kind of connect with or comprehend, I guess. Has that always been the case in your art, or has it been something that's grown stronger over time as you've kind of matured?
I think it's always been the case, but I think my work has kind of almost evolved into being somewhat even more personal in that realm. So I think it's always been a part of it. I think I've just kind of, over time, because of spending so much time building these stories and building these themes, it's probably grown a little deeper. I have to laugh though, because I feel like a lot of people probably look at my art and it's like, wow, that's a really pretty dog. Wow, those dogs are playing. That's cool. But then in my own head, there's this whole story that I've built up of, these are two warring families. There's this symbolization of loss and grief. And someone else might see something different. I think that's wonderful. So I think for myself, those stories and deeper meanings and symbolisms that I build in my work are kind of almost just for myself. Because I don't really go to great lengths to explain things. I don't care if someone only sees, kind of the face value of something. I think that's their experience, right? That's kind of how they're taking it in. I think that's kind of the beauty of art, is you kind of get to enjoy whatever story it is you're seeing for yourself as the viewer, even if that's different from the artist's initial story that they were trying to portray.
And so these stories that are mostly for yourself, but that you're telling through your work, are they about yourself? Are they autobiographical, or are they statements about the general human experience? What are the stories generally?
I would say a mixture of both. I think, like I said, because I spend so much time creating each piece, there's a lot of autobiographical things that kind of fold into each piece, but I think it's an outlet for me to experience or share my perception and perspectives of things that are happening right now. Kind of a way of processing things as well.
Do you find that some of these things are subconscious, like that you didn't even realize that you were incorporating this thing until you looked back on it several years later?
No, I feel like subconscious, an idea might come through, but I'm very intentional with kind of the work I'm creating or the story that I'm building.
Okay. And have you ever been like surprised by somebody's interpretation of a piece, or something that kind of took you by, weren't expecting?
I'm always surprised. Yeah. And I think that has to do with, it's like everyone sees things differently. And so I think that's kind of the beauty of, getting to hear what people, I guess, connect to a piece, or, oh, this makes me feel this way. That's always interesting to hear, because usually it has nothing to do with why I originally made something. And I think that's really enjoyable. Oftentimes the titles of my work, I think I try to at least fold in my original intention in of the piece with the title of the work. That's why sometimes they're really long. But yeah, other than that, I do like the idea of kind of that symbolism or the whole piece itself being up to interpretation.
And one of the common symbols that I've seen incorporated in your work for a while, or common motifs, are, people or animals with things tied to them, whether they be notes or ornamental elements. And I read that actually came about because of you losing a lot of your possessions in a house fire. And we hadn't talked about that, so I didn't realize that had happened. How long ago was that? Was that when you were growing up? Was that when you were an adult?
No, that was the first apartment that I had. That was by my college. One night, so I lived above my landlord. And one night I was listening to music and drawing, and I had my headphones on, and I heard banging, and I took my headphones off, and I was like, what the hell is that? And it was someone banging on my door to get out of my apartment. And so our whole front side of the apartment had caught on fire.
Wow.
And they had taken care of that. But when I had come back in with the fire marshal, and they were like just making sure that everything was okay. I had been in there for like 2 to 5 minutes by myself. And I went into the kitchen, and the wall was hot.
Oh,
and so
wow.
the fire was actually in the walls. And so they came back, and yeah, I lost a lot of stuff, but I gained a lot of insight into the fact that none of those things mattered. And there was, only a couple of things that I would have cared if they were gone. And so, the motif of tying things to yourself, or animals with things tied to them, are kind of those little bits of things that you would want to take with you, that are important to you. And, that saying, you got away with just the shirt on your back. It's like, okay, well, what did I get away with? My mom's poems, these little keepsakes. And so sometimes I incorporate that into the work as a way of showing what's important to that central figure.
No, I really like that. And another, just continuing on with other motifs that are often in your work, or other, I guess, components of your work that I've observed, patterns. You really love patterns, and I love your patterns. So how did your love of patterns come about? And does that stem from just a general interest in fashion in some way, or where does that come from?
As you can see, but your listeners cannot, I really don't care about fashion all too much. But the love for me of patterns, as a lot of things, stemmed from my grandfather's collection of work. a lot of the woodblock prints that he has, it is very heavily textile focus. You have, the beautiful fabric that the figures are wrapped in. You have, just very hyper detailed textiles. And that was a part of what I loved poring over when I was a kid, of those prints were the fabrics, and how it almost felt like some people were just swimming in these like billowed fabrics, and that became almost like a second figure in the prints for me. And then also the Fillmore posters themselves, are very hyper saturated with details and lines and squiggles and, all of those things, I think over time buried themselves into my brain and, became things that I also incorporated into my work, just because of a love and respect for what textile can do in terms of movement and things like that. And it also can be a little trippy sometimes when you put two patterns together that have a little bit more movement than, say just a flat gradient or something like that. It definitely adds a richness, I think. It's also really meditative to just create a really weird pattern that I have to draw kind of perfectly so it looks like a pattern over and over and over again.
Obviously color isn't something that you typically, have to consider that much in the work that you make. But I'm curious, does that make it easier for you or harder for you? Because it could be easier in terms of one less thing you have to think about, but much harder because you need to communicate things without color, which is a way of communicating things. So how do you think about kind of the absence of color?
Yeah, I think for me, it's, I've always kind of likened it to, like, I grew up watching black and white movies with my mom, and in black and white movies, and when you think of also like, say like a stage performance, like things have to be amplified in order to tell the story. So, high contrast of things in black and white movies, you tend to pay more attention to, but you're not distracted by color. A person could be standing next to someone else and you're not distracted by what that person is wearing. It's the story, and that kind of has always been interesting to me, because in an absence of color, there's a lot more that happens. And so, I think also integrating patterns helps to strengthen, or at least add some more depth and contrast visually. And also, I think maybe a part of the actual story, when there's just kind of the black and white world that it exists in.
So kind of shining a brighter spotlight on the story itself, rather than distracting you with things that may not connect with, or may not be tied to the story.
Yeah, I also feel like people have such personal connections or emotional connections to color, that's always been something I kind of wanted to strip out of it. I think that probably, now that I'm thinking of it, I think it probably stems from like when I was working with Emily. It's like, oh, those colors don't work together. And, having those kind of like thoughts about color and removing or like subtracting that from the equation has been, I think, at times more challenging than if I was to just work in color.
So shifting a little bit into your process, how do you tend to arrive at ideas for new works? Do you have like a daily, you mentioned a sketchbook earlier and thumbnailing. Is that how you kind of work out your ideas, is through a sketchbook routine?
Yeah, I have a few sketchbooks. I'm not really good at dedicating a specific, like, I create a sketchbook every 6 months or 1 year. They just sit around forever. And I have a really large sketchbook that I fill with thumbnails of compositions, an idea that pops into my head of just scrawling it really quickly. I think the process of thumbnailing is sometimes more interesting to me than like evolving it into a full sketch, because there's so much more movement. It's almost like you've pressed pause on the idea and just like slapped it onto a page. There's a lot more movement and information in the thumbnail sometimes for me. And so that's, I think, probably my most favorite part of the process, is being able to create those thumbnails and look back on them after I finish a piece as well. Of like, what did I miss?
And I guess, does it evolve a whole lot? I mean, since, from the thumbnail stage, does it take a huge turn usually, or does it stay pretty close to the original concept?
A lot more information goes into the final pieces versus the thumbnail. I've found that over the years, though, I've been more drawn to the thumbnails than some of the actual final works. And that's been really interesting, because it's allowed me to start playing with the idea of subtracting information from pieces and having a little bit more of an exploration of, well, what if I made, the thumbnail into the piece? Like, how does that look? Like, what if the piece is the thumbnail? So that's been really interesting to me. But it's very interesting to see what gets added into the final work versus the thumbnail.
How does it usually go from thumbnail to final? Do you just have iterative, more and more refined sketches until you're happy with it? Or how do you approach building that composition out?
Yeah, I just keep kind of redrawing it from the thumbnail to see what works, to see, from what my intention was, like, oh, I need to add this, or, what if this was laid out differently? And yeah, it's an interesting dance with myself. I'll draw something almost 5 times before I, feel that the composition is good, or that certain elements have, landed in there that feel like they actually tell the story really well.
Leading up to that, the point where you're happy with it, do you do much in the way of research, working through your ideas? Does that help you in some way?
No. It doesn't really. I kind of just like to attempt to build what's in my head from that initial thought. Sometimes when I've used kind of more like a research period of figuring out the information that I'm trying to illustrate, it's almost gotten in the way. And so I find just diving in and drawing to be more satisfactory in that process. I also feel like I end up making some mistakes that sometimes are happy accidents. So,
do you think that intentional kind of keeping it within your own imagination keeps it more authentic, like causes you to not stray away from the original spirit of the idea?
Sometimes I do. I don't really think that it would hurt it too much. I think I spend so long working on the piece that if I also spent so long trying to research and really dial things in, I would probably never finish a piece. There's that saying, like, artwork is only abandoned, never finished. That resonates a lot. Like, you could probably work on something forever. So it might hamper the process.
Well, and I've never talked to you about this before, but I read that you don't use any reference material at all in terms of like photographic imagery, that you always like to, kind of draw entirely from your imagination or your memory. As detailed as your work tends to be, that's impressive. You must have an incredible memory. Is that just like a way of challenging yourself, or is it just so you stick more to that pure vision that's in your head?
So it used to be. And this is also why I feel like if anyone would ask me, like, what advice would you give young artists? It would be not to do interviews. Just because things evolve. Like when I said that, I wasn't using any references. It was definitely a challenge to myself of, oh, I can draw it. I know what that looks like, which is fine. I feel like when I said that, it wasn't something that was like impressive to me. It was more of a, let's try and do this without looking at anything. But I started doing life drawing classes a few years after that interview, and really understood the benefit of working from life, of really utilizing some sort of reference in order to train my brain more and train my hand more. So I will bring in bits of plants and draw those, try and figure out, oh, if I see on my walk there's a plant that I've never seen before, or the leaf is doing something that I find really interesting, like I'll either take a photo of it or bring it home and just stare at it. And then, in terms of people, I had a model finch come to my loft in Oakland a few years back, and just kind of drew her as a muse for a while, which was wonderful for me to be able to stare at the form and understand and digest the way lighting hits the body, a certain way, or kind of build like a better mental reference for things. So although the probably like 20-year-old me who used to do that was having a good time not looking at references and like trying to do that, I do see the value in the mental exercise that happens from looking at a figure and drawing from life and things like that. And so I think that part of my process has certainly evolved over time, which is wonderful.
Yeah. And so I guess, do you tend to try to schedule photo shoots or live drawing sessions for all of your work now?
I was pre-pandemic. So, that might be something that I do again, but for now it's kind of like, I think I've done those things to the point where I feel comfortable and confident, say, doing certain poses by myself, but I look forward to finding a place that I can do life drawing again at, that opportunity. Unfortunately, they, where I was going, they no longer offer that. And so my friend Elizabeth occasionally brings a model in to her studio for the public to draw on. So I'll probably start doing that again.
Right on. As far as mediums that you work in, obviously graphite is an important part of your repertoire. I guess one of the ways in which that I've read that you describe the way that you work with graphite is painting with graphite, which I think is a very kind of visceral description, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But tell me about that technique. I guess, how did you develop that over the years, and how do you think about the way in which you use graphite?
Yeah, I think the reference of painting with graphite just comes from kind of the laborious process of layering and layering and layering until I'm building a surface that feels appropriate for the drawing. I'm not really sure how that happened, other than just oh, look at this is what happens if I sit here for 4 hours and keep layering this small area. Oh, I really like how that looks. So that is kind of how I look at painting with graphite, is just really trying to build the surface in a way that feels smooth and conveys a little bit of a sense that it's not necessarily pencil. I don't know. I look at it and I see graphite. I've had other people go like, what medium did you use? And it's like, it's pencil. So maybe part of that process allows for it not to feel like a more rigid line drawing. Feels a little bit more lush, I guess.
Yeah. And you mentioned the time in which it takes to accomplish that or to achieve that. And you said earlier about the unhealthy work-life balance that you had in your younger days. I guess, how is your work-life balance today? Do you feel like you have a healthier balance?
I do. It just takes me a long time to make art. I think that's something I was getting really frustrated with myself about a few years ago, just because I think I was just like, well, I need to produce more because I have all these ideas and they're just sitting there, but I work so slow. I was getting really rather mean to myself about that. But it honestly, it is what it is. That's what it takes. And I also think that's probably why I've started also exploring other mediums as a way of figuring out how to, flush an idea. And I think at this time for myself, not everything has to be in graphite. I've started working with just kind of like acrylic line drawings, basically. So acrylic illustrations, just to get an idea out that maybe doesn't need to be resolved with a full blown graphite piece. So that's been interesting, but yeah, I take a long time to make things.
And so you mentioned, experimentation, exploration, and did different mediums. And I think it was 2019, 2020 when you kind of went into a heavy stage of experimentation, exploring different ways of, expressing yourself, whether it be sculpture. You went a lot into abstract sculpture. You mentioned acrylic line drawings. I guess what motivated that desire to experiment, or has that just always been like, have you always just wanted to evolve your process, and this is just another form of that?
I think for me, in the work that I do, if I didn't evolve and my work didn't evolve, rather, I would be miserable creating art. I think every artist should allow themselves to create things that perhaps push the boundaries of what they know they can create. And I think over the past few years, what I know I can create has become less thrilling than what I don't know that I can create. And so I've been, exploring kind of the boundaries of my own creative capacity, which has been really, really wonderful, especially over the past few years with everything. It's been nice to find little bits of new joy in being able to, say, work with wood and, create a sculpture in the moment, allowing it to just kind of become what it wants to become, or the same with clay, or, having an idea and not being so hard on myself that I have to create a full-fledged, piece out of it. And I can just create a line drawing, something a little bit more gestural. It's become more important than anything for me now to have the ability to explore.
Was that difficult, I guess, giving up some element of that control, like working in more abstract terms? Because, so much of your work before then is so detailed, highly rendered, so moving into more abstracts, was that challenging to you to give yourself that freedom?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to the work that I create. And I put a lot of I have put a lot of boundaries on myself, and I have been creatively rigid, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. So being able to do something where I don't know how it's going to end up, and I can't foresee what it's going to look like before it's done, has been an exploration in I think having faith in myself creatively. And that's been really awesome, for lack of a better word.
Very cool. And do you think that any of these areas that you've been exploring in will become kind of a permanent part of your creative output? Do you like doing them? Is it something you want to continue to do more often?
I think so. I think I'm to the point in where I'm exploring how do I bridge kind of these things together. I think that sculpture and like seeing things in the 3D form has been really interesting to me, being a 2D artist. That it'll be interesting to see how I can kind of bridge those two worlds for myself. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see how that plays out. I think I'm obsessed with making sculptures, but I also need to stop because I'm just like surrounded by them now. And I'm like, I don't have that many surfaces in my home. So yeah, I should probably figure out what I'm doing with all of that. But I do think it's going to be something that I end up, evolving further over time. I think it won't go down for me as a pandemic folly. I think it'll be something that hopefully grows into something interesting for myself.
Are there other mediums that you'd like to explore that you haven't had the chance to?
I mean, I could say paint. I do enjoy painting, and so I think as my eyesight gets crummier than it presently is, I might be exploring that a little bit more. But I don't know. Graphite is always something I think I will enjoy as kind of my primary medium, just because it's such a direct way of communicating. I can instantly just draw it. I started using graphite because I couldn't really afford, a bunch of mediums or things like that. But then it also was just easier. I didn't have to pull all of my paints out. There wasn't a process. I could just sit down and draw.
We talked a lot about the themes in your work and the very personal nature of the messaging that you're communicating. But I know that for a while, at least, you made it a point to make a yearly trip to Europe to kind of draw inspiration and spark that creative voice within yourself. So tell me about that, I guess, that tradition of yours. When did that start, and what prompted you to start doing that?
Well, that was in 2014, I think. Yeah, I don't know. We have wonderful museums here in America, but Europe almost in and of itself is a museum. There's so much inspiration from the architecture that has, withstood the test of time, and components of that, and sculptural works. And I was fortunate enough to be able to travel as much as I have, to be able to, I guess, surround myself with beauty more foreign to the things that I was seeing on a daily basis, or had access to. And it definitely started to, I think, have an impact on the work that I was creating, because I was starting to build a visual language that I think was prompted a lot by the trips that I would take, and the things that I would see. And so, yeah, it just became something where I had the privilege to be able to get to travel every year and explore that.
In addition to Europe, are there other cultures that you haven't had the opportunity to experience that you think would add more to your creative vision, or your creative, I guess, the way in which you express yourself?
Oh yeah, definitely. Hopefully I will live long enough where I can, experience the world. That would be wonderful. I would love to go to Morocco one day. I think that's from what I've seen, an absolutely breathtaking place. Ripe with beauty. So I would love to be able to travel a whole lot more than I have done so. I think just being outside of your comfort zone is also truly inspiring. And I think being away from home, away from a studio is something that I think can change the way that you perceive things around you. And, perception is a large part of just kind of how I absorb things and figure out how I'm going to articulate the thoughts that I'm having into artwork.
And I'm guessing that COVID has affected this tradition in some way. Have you been able to go since the start of the pandemic?
I have not. I am figuring out, though, where kind of that first trip will be. So, yeah, it definitely put a kibosh on being able to to go anywhere. But I think that's all of us, right?
I mean, have you felt that less creative because of that? Because, obviously this was meant to be as a yearly source of kind of getting outside of your own environment. Have you just, since we've been through 3 years of this now, do you feel like you've been less off because of it?
Oddly, it's the reverse. I think that traveling has always been important, just so that I can, have a break from myself and surroundings and kind of hit refresh on my brain. But, over the past few years, I think I've been able to confront myself a little bit more and confront things that maybe there were a lot more distractions around at the time, that I didn't have to really kind of take those journeys inward and, explore, okay, what am I doing? Like, do I enjoy doing this? What does this mean to me after like so many years of doing, this particular type of work? How do I, like, what is next for what I create? And I don't really know if those conversations would have happened as fluidly or as directly if I hadn't have been homebound like everyone else, and really just had to go like, okay, well, I can't go to the art store because we can't leave the house, so
right.
Well, there's wood in the attic. I have one more sheet of paper, and I don't want to use that. I don't know.
Force you to stay in your own head, it sounds like, and just introspect more.
Yeah. And, I think that was also the catalyst of like, okay, well, I'm going to make other things because I have to be more creative with what's around me.
Sure. So shifting gears a little bit and almost selfishly, because as I'm a big music nerd, and you've done a few posters for A Perfect Circle. So I just kind of wanted to know how that came about. How did that project come to you, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, that was the neat part about that project, was that I grew up with posters. I grew up with poster art. I grew up, with seeing some of the most brilliant illustrators create posters for some of the, biggest, most interesting bands of the 60s and 70s. I don't really know how that came about. I think Billy just text messaged me, and I was like, he was like, do you want to do a poster? And I was like, sure. That sounds fun. I was like, what is it for? And it was for their San Francisco show. And that was really awesome because, again, it was really rad to create a poster for San Francisco. Because it just felt like, I don't know, it almost felt like a gift I could share with my grandfather of like, I made a poster and it's for a San Francisco show. And, but yeah, that, I don't know, he just text messaged me. I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Like, what do you want? And he was just like, anything you want to do. And so it was great to have some creative license, for a band that I have loved for a long time. And be able to share that was really, really special. And then they asked me a couple more times, and I created, I think, 3 posters for them.
Was your approach working on these different than the approach that we talked about earlier with your personal work?
I think the only thing that was rather different was just, having to go like, do you like this? Like, here's my drawing. Do you like this? I don't really have to do that with my own work. So that was, I think, the only thing that was really different. Fortunately, Billy liked what I did there, so I didn't really have to be too fussy with the actual drawing or the ideas, which was great. Probably would have been fun to have been told, like, no, I don't like that, and see where that would have forced my hand to go into a different direction. But yeah, it was a process that was really similar. I think, if anything, after creating the drawing, it kind of was a little bit more graphic element work. And so, really kind of creating that centerpiece, and then, creating the other components that I think tied it together to be more of a poster and less of a, just a piece of art.
And so, you and I have talked a lot about music, mostly nerding out over industrial music. But I guess, how do you think that music has affected or influenced your work in general? Has it, or has it just been kind of a backdrop that has had a subtle influence?
Well, music has always been a huge part of my life just as a person. But creatively, I love listening to music while I work. And so, it becomes a part of that process. I don't know. I think a lot of people are like, I like every music, or I like all types of music. I truly do. Like, truly do. Like, I think you and I go on industrial tangents a lot, but.
What are you listening to right now? Anything good?
Oh, what am I listening to? Let's see, I was listening to, goodness, don't laugh at me. I have been on I think it's a nostalgia hit that I need. I was listening to a lot of new metal.
Okay, like Korn and Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, I think my top album last year was Korn's new album, which is hilarious. It's a good album.
Does Jonathan Davis still do the scat thing?
Absolutely.
Of course, that's a cornerstone.
Yeah, goodness, that's really funny. No, a part of, I think, the fun thing with things kind of changing a little bit after the past few years is being able to go see some new shows and things like that. So yeah, looking forward to being able to see more live shows.
Awesome. So let's talk about what you have coming up. What have you been focusing on lately? Anything exciting you have on the horizon that you'd want to talk about?
Awesome. I think right now I'm just trying to figure out what I am doing with kind of all of the works that I've started. In 2020, I was supposed to have a show in Philadelphia, which obviously did not happen. And so a lot of time has passed since then. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, well, all those ideas that I was wanting to share, I'd like to do different ideas. I'd like to create different works. It's kind of been a lot of time has passed between that. And so really just shifting to figure out how I finish the things that I'm working on right now, and in, I guess, what capacity I'll share that in. So yeah, not a whole hell of a lot, but a lot of work. And so that's exciting. That's exciting for me.
Do you think, or is this still undetermined, that once you kind of get enough work under your belt that you'd want to share, that it would be with the same gallery in Philadelphia, or is that still TBD as far as what you would do with it?
I was actually going to show with Jess in her space.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so it wasn't even going to be like a formal gallery space. It was, I was kind of going to just take over her whole storeroom, but then obviously that all had to close down. So I'm not really sure. I think, with the amount of kind of sculptural things that I've done, it would be really fun to do something, on the West Coast, just so I didn't have to ship things. Being a little selfish, but yeah, I'm not really sure. I think that it probably won't be in the same space that I had planned. Maybe on the West Coast.
Awesome.
Maybe I won't have to hop on a plane to go to a show
and figure out how to ship a lot of things.
Yeah, it's I feel like part of my life is being like an expert packer.
Right.
It's just.
So I guess where can people find you online so they can stay up to date with the latest and find out about what you have coming up next?
Yeah, I have my website, NicomiNixTurner.com. And I have obviously social media. I apologize if you expect content delivered to your door daily. But yeah, that's primarily it for where you can find me.
And everybody sign up for your newsletter. So that's, I'm assuming, on your website, right?
Yeah, everyone sign up for my newsletter that I occasionally remember to send things out.
All right, so last question, and this is something that I like to ask everybody. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me have on the show?
Oh, God. I didn't prepare for that one. I think I would be very interested to hear what Christian Rex Van Minnen would have to say about his work and practice.
Very cool. Awesome. Great suggestion. I follow him as well, so I will add them to the list. I appreciate it. Nicomi, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it as well, and hopefully I got everything out that you were wanting to know.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Nicomi. I really love Nicomi's work. And of course, her focus on nature, I've always personally been a big fan of. But I also really love how rich in symbolism her works are. And I found it really interesting what she had to say about the very, personal nature of many of these symbols and the stories that they tell. It's almost like a conversation that she's having with herself, that we're fortunate enough to overhear. And it's great that she's felt this freedom over the last few years to explore all these new ways of working and these more abstract ways to express herself creatively, but also how important evolution is to her in general. I think she said that at this point, the things that she's never done are more exciting to her than the things she already has. That's such a cool way to look at the world, always striving for growth. I'm also excited by the new work she's going to be focusing on. It sounds like it's going to manifest in some form, originally for a show in Philadelphia, but might take place on the West Coast now. So definitely follow her Instagram, or better yet, subscribe to her newsletter to stay up to date with all the latest. So thanks again to Nicomi for joining me today, and thank you for checking out the show. I'm truly grateful for your support. And just a reminder, one big way you could help out if you're really enjoying the show would be to check out the show's Patreon. You can find all the details on patreon.com/artaffairs. And as always, you can contact me through my website at artaffairs.podcast.com or on Instagram at artaffairs.podcast. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.